Daniel Roberts, the CEO of Roberts Auto Enterprises, had always prided himself on his company's reputation for success, but lately he had grown increasingly uneasy about the culture within his business. In an effort to understand the day-to-day operations and gain insight into the lives of his employees, Daniel decided to go undercover. Disguising himself as a new assistant, he stepped into one of his company's busiest garages, blending in with the team. The garage, a place that should have been filled with innovation and teamwork, instead gave off an air of neglect. The hum of engines and the clatter of tools filled the air, but something about the place felt wrong. His attention was quickly drawn to Lisa, a skilled mechanic who had been working tirelessly under less than ideal conditions. Lisa, a black woman with remarkable skills, was working on a particularly tricky engine part. She moved quickly, her hands steady despite the worn tools she was using. But as she tightened a bolt, her screwdriver slipped and the sharp edge cut deep into her hand. Blood immediately began to drip from the wound, staining the floor beneath her. Despite the obvious pain, Lisa didn't stop. She simply wrapped a dirty rag around her bleeding hand and continued working. Daniel watched in silent disbelief as she ignored the injury, refusing to show any weakness. He couldn't fathom why someone would continue working in such a state, but Lisa seemed determined to carry on. A small voice in her head whispered. The reason she had no choice. A missed day of work meant a missed paycheck, and a missed paycheck meant risking her job, her livelihood, and the future of her children. As Daniel observed her struggle, he could sense the weight of the environment she was working in. The garage was filled with broken tools, some barely held together with duct tape and electrical wire. A torque wrench, its handle barely intact, lay discarded on the floor. He saw a drill without its safety guard and a hydraulic jack that was leaking oil, clearly unsafe to use. The scene was a stark contrast to the polished image the company projected. Daniel's stomach churned as he realized the neglect that had permeated his business. How had it gotten to this point? How had the company that he inherited from his father, a company built on values of safety, respect, and quality, fallen into such disarray? His thoughts were interrupted as Peter, the regional manager, appeared in the doorway, his voice gruff as he barked orders at Lisa. Peter's tone towards Lisa was harsh, dismissing her concerns about safety equipment with a simple, "We don't have the budget for new tools, and that car needs to be done now." The callousness in his voice was palpable, and Lisa didn't even flinch. Daniel noticed the way Peter spoke to the other mechanics, all white men, with a level of camaraderie and respect that Lisa never received. It was clear to Daniel that this wasn't just about poor equipment. This was about something deeper, a culture of neglect and disregard for employees, especially those who didn't fit a certain mold. As Daniel stood there disguised as a lowly assistant, he realized how disconnected he had become from the realities his employees were facing. It was time for change, but first he needed to understand just how deep the issues ran. Daniel's next move was to take a closer look at the safety practices in the garage. After a few hours of working alongside Lisa and observing her impeccable skill, he made his way to the warehouse where the garage's accident reports were stored. The room was dimly lit, and as Daniel sifted through the files, he was horrified by what he found. Dozens of reports showed accidents involving Lisa and other employees, each one marked as a human error or employee negligence. But as Daniel dug deeper, he found a troubling memo from Peter to the corporate headquarters. The memo outlined how Peter had been optimizing costs by delaying maintenance and cutting back on essential safety equipment. The numbers made sense to the finance team, but to Daniel, the cost was clear. Lives were at risk. The realization hit Daniel like a wave crashing onto rocks. He had been too focused on the company's bottom line, too invested in growth and profitability to see the human cost of his decisions. Lisa, who had been working tirelessly with outdated tools and in unsafe conditions, was just one example of the many employees who had suffered under this system. The blood on the garage floor was more than just a stain. It was a symbol of the failure of leadership. Daniel knew something had to change, and it had to start with him. He couldn't ignore the truth any longer. His company had allowed a toxic culture to thrive, and now it was up to him to fix it. In the days that followed, Daniel worked alongside Lisa and the other employees, gaining their trust and understanding their struggles. He learned that many of them, like Lisa, had been forced to make sacrifices, risking their health and safety just to keep their jobs. The garage, once a symbol of progress and innovation, had become a place of hardship and despair. Daniel knew that if he wanted to rebuild Roberts Auto Enterprises, he needed to change the culture, starting with the way employees were treated. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Daniel was determined to lead the charge, not just as a CEO, but as someone who understood the importance of integrity, safety, and respect for every worker in his company. The road to transformation had just begun, and Daniel Roberts was ready to face the challenge head-on. As Daniel continued his undercover role in the garage, he began to notice the alarming extent of the neglect that had infected Roberts Auto Enterprises. What had initially seemed like a few isolated incidents soon revealed themselves to be part of a much larger pattern. One day, while performing the menial tasks assigned to him, Daniel discovered a drawer full of accident reports, their worn edges betraying the frequency with which they were filed. Each report told the story of a mechanic injured on the job, some cuts, bruises, and even chemical burns, labeled as employee negligence or human error. But as Daniel sifted through the pages, it became clear that these were not simple accidents. These were the result of a systemic failure, a failure that stemmed from the very top of the company. The more he dug, the more he realized that these injuries could have been prevented if the garage had been equipped with the proper tools and safety measures. The cost-cutting measures implemented by the company had made this all possible, and it was more than just a careless oversight. It was a deliberate decision to prioritize profit over people's lives. But it wasn't just the lack of proper equipment that disturbed Daniel. It was the stark realization that these accidents were not just about broken tools. While he continued to work as the lowly assistant, he overheard whispers from Lisa and the other employees that revealed the darker side of the garage's operations. Lisa, in particular, seemed to carry the weight of this broken system more than anyone else. During a break, she confided in Daniel, unaware that he was in fact the CEO. She revealed that despite her remarkable skills as a mechanic, she had faced constant discrimination from the moment she had started working at the garage. "They never trusted me," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Even though I knew more about cars than half the guys here, I was always treated like I didn't belong." Lisa spoke of how her requests for better equipment and safer working conditions had been ignored, dismissed as unnecessary. She was never given the respect she deserved, not only because of her gender, but also because of the color of her skin. She had worked tirelessly in the most dangerous of conditions, not because she was incapable of doing better, but because she had no other choice. Her determination to stay in the job was born from necessity, not desire. She had a family to support, and any complaint would only lead to her being pushed out, just as many of her colleagues had been. As Daniel listened to Lisa's story, a deep sense of guilt began to settle in his chest. He realized that her suffering was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the larger issue within the company. The environment at Roberts Auto Enterprises was toxic, and it wasn't just about the lack of equipment or the dangerous tools. It was about the culture that had been allowed to flourish unchecked for far too long. It was about the systemic neglect that had poisoned every part of the business, from the way employees were treated to the way profits were prioritized over people. Daniel's mind raced as he thought back to the memo he had found earlier in the day, the one that had outlined the company's cost-saving measures. The document written by Tom, the regional manager, detailed how the company had cut back on equipment maintenance and delayed safety upgrades to save money. Tom had also made a point of mentioning that the safety concerns raised by employees, including Lisa, were being overblown. He had made it clear that the company's financial performance was the priority, not the safety or well-being of the workers. Daniel couldn't believe what he was reading. This was the reality that had been hidden from him, the truth about the company he had inherited from his father, a company built on values of integrity and respect. How had he not seen this before? How had he let it go on for so long? The more Daniel thought about it, the clearer it became that the company's financial team, including his own department, had played a significant role in enabling these dangerous practices. As the CEO, Daniel had trusted his finance team to make sound decisions, but now he realized they had been complicit in putting profits above everything else. The cuts to safety budgets, the ignoring of employee concerns, and the deliberate disregard for maintenance were not just the work of one man, they were the result of a culture that had been allowed to grow unchecked. The financial department, with its focus on the bottom line, had approved these measures without understanding or caring about the consequences. They had ignored the warnings of the employees, and now people like Lisa were paying the price. Daniel's heart sank as he realized that he had allowed this to happen. His department, the very team he had trusted to guide the company's financial decisions, had played a direct role in putting lives at risk. He had been so focused on numbers, on achieving targets, that he had failed to see the human cost of those decisions. In the days that followed, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility that weighed on him. He knew he had to take action, but he also knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Exposing the truth about the company's practices would be difficult, and there would be many who would resist change. But as he continued to work alongside Lisa and the other employees, his resolve only grew stronger. He couldn't continue to stand by while his employees suffered. It was time to make a change, and that change had to come from the top. Daniel knew that he would have to confront not just the regional managers like Tom, but the entire system that had allowed these practices to continue. It wouldn't be enough to simply fix the equipment or provide better tools. He needed to overhaul the entire company culture, to restore the values of integrity and respect that his father had built the company on. And most importantly, he needed to make sure that employees like Lisa, who had been pushed to the brink, would never have to endure this kind of mistreatment again. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Daniel was ready to face it head on. It was time to rebuild Roberts Auto Enterprises, not just as a profitable company, but as a company that truly cared for the people who made it what it was. The more Daniel witnessed from his position as an undercover assistant, the clearer it became that Roberts Auto Enterprises had deteriorated far beyond what he had initially imagined. The system of neglect and mistreatment wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was ingrained in the very fabric of the company's culture. The tipping point came when Daniel made an unexpected discovery that would shift everything. He had been working alongside Lisa, continuing his role as a lowly assistant, when he overheard a conversation between Tom, the regional manager, and another employee. Tom's tone was harsh, filled with disdain as he barked orders at Lisa, dismissing her requests for better tools and supplies. But it wasn't just the tone that disturbed Daniel. He learned that Tom had been actively ignoring safety regulations and had been treating employees, especially Lisa, with blatant disrespect. It became clear that the atmosphere in the garage wasn't just a product of neglect, it was also one of deliberate mistreatment. Worse still, Daniel uncovered that Tom had been embezzling company funds, money that was supposed to go toward replacing outdated tools and improving safety equipment. Tom had chosen instead to line his pockets while the employees continued to work with dangerous equipment. The very person responsible for managing the safety and well-being of the garage employees was the one causing the most harm. The weight of this realization hit Daniel hard. He had entrusted Tom with the leadership of the regional branch, assuming he would act in the best interests of both the employees and the company. But now Daniel knew that Tom's actions had endangered the lives of countless employees, all in the name of financial gain. As Daniel walked through the garage reflecting on what he had discovered, he couldn't help but think of Lisa. Despite the deplorable conditions and the way she had been treated, Lisa never faltered in her work. Her skill as a mechanic was undeniable, and Daniel had witnessed it firsthand. Despite the broken tools, the constant risk of injury, and the toxic environment, Lisa continued to work with an extraordinary level of precision and expertise. Watching her work, Daniel felt a deep sense of admiration. She was not just another employee, she was the heart and soul of the garage, a symbol of resilience and dedication in the face of overwhelming adversity. But it wasn't enough for Lisa to simply keep going. Daniel realized that it wasn't just the tools that needed fixing, it was the entire system. The company had let people like Lisa suffer, and now it was time to right that wrong. Inspired by Lisa's unwavering professionalism, Daniel began to formulate a plan to change the culture at Roberts Auto Enterprises. He knew that confronting Tom was just the beginning. He would need to expose the corrupt practices and implement reforms that would not only fix the physical conditions of the workplace, but also restore the integrity and respect that had been lost. Daniel knew the changes wouldn't happen overnight, but they had to start somewhere. The first step would be to gather the evidence he needed to expose Tom's actions and present it to the board of directors. He would need a team of trusted allies to help him execute the plan. That's when he turned to Sarah, the company's legal director, and Rachel, the head auditor. Sarah had been with the company for years and had always been fiercely loyal to the company's values. Rachel, on the other hand, was known for her sharp eye for detail and her ability to uncover financial discrepancies. Together, they would be instrumental in bringing the truth to light. Daniel met with them privately and shared what he had learned about Tom's behavior and the systemic neglect that had plagued the company for years. Sarah and Rachel were shocked but determined to help. They immediately set to work scouring through financial records and accident reports, looking for any evidence that could prove Tom's wrongdoings and uncover the full extent of the embezzlement. As the days passed, Daniel continued his undercover work, carefully observing every interaction between Tom, Lisa, and the other employees. He paid close attention to the way Tom treated Lisa, how he disregarded her concerns and belittled her ideas. It was clear that Tom saw Lisa as nothing more than a cog in the machine, someone to be exploited and discarded when it suited him. But Daniel also saw something else: Lisa's quiet strength. Despite Tom's mistreatment, she continued to rise above the negativity and focus on her work. Her talent and skill were unmatched, but she had been stuck in an environment that failed to support her. Daniel knew that to truly revamp the company, they would need to overhaul not just the physical conditions, but also the leadership culture. Tom's behavior had poisoned the workplace, and without the right leadership, nothing would change. With Sarah and Rachel's help, Daniel began to gather the final pieces of evidence. Rachel uncovered records of the financial discrepancies, including the forged signatures and manipulated documents that had allowed Tom's embezzlement to go undetected. Sarah, meanwhile, worked on compiling a legal case that would expose Tom's negligence and discriminatory actions. With the evidence in hand, Daniel knew it was time to take action. He couldn't allow this toxic culture to continue. He gathered the team, including Sarah and Rachel, and outlined his plan. They would confront Tom, expose his wrongdoings, and take immediate steps to implement company-wide reforms. The first move would be to present the evidence to the board of directors, forcing them to confront the reality of what had been happening under their watch. Daniel knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance, and the changes he wanted to implement wouldn't be easy. But he was determined to turn the company around, not just for Lisa, but for every employee who had been mistreated or ignored. It was time to restore the values that Roberts Auto Enterprises had once stood for. It was time to make the company a place where integrity, respect, and safety were prioritized above all else. And with that, Daniel set his plan into motion, determined to bring about the change that was long overdue. The moment Daniel had been preparing for had finally arrived. He had spent weeks working undercover, gathering evidence and formulating a plan to change Roberts Auto Enterprises for the better. But now, as he stood in the garage, the weight of the decision ahead hung heavy on his shoulders. The employees were finishing up for the day, unaware that the man they had been working alongside, the new assistant, was actually their CEO. With a deep breath, Daniel decided it was time to reveal his true identity. He walked up to Lisa, who was in the middle of cleaning the tools, and called the attention of the rest of the employees. The room fell silent as they all turned toward him, unsure of what was happening. Daniel removed his worn cap, the disguise he had worn for weeks, and looked them in the eyes. "I am Daniel Roberts," he said, his voice steady but firm, "the CEO of Roberts Auto Enterprises." Shock spread across the room like wildfire. Whispers erupted among the employees as they tried to process what they had just heard. The assistant they had been working with, The one who had been carrying boxes and working on engines just like them was the very person at the top of the company. For a moment, Daniel allowed the silence to settle in before he spoke again. "I've been working here undercover to see the truth for myself," he continued. "And what I've seen, especially how some of you have been treated, is unacceptable." Daniel's gaze locked on Tom, the regional manager who was standing at the back of the room, his face pale. Tom, who had spent years mistreating employees and embezzling funds, now found himself facing the consequences of his actions. "Tom," Daniel said, his voice unwavering, "you are fired." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Tom's face turned bright red, and for a moment he stood frozen, not believing what he was hearing. His eyes darted between the employees and Daniel, his mind racing to find some excuse, some way to salvage his position. But there was nothing. The truth had been exposed, and there was no going back. "You've allowed this garage to become a toxic place. You've neglected safety, mistreated employees, and ignored their voices for too long." Daniel added his tone, now carrying the full weight of his authority. "Effective. Immediately. You're out." The room was still as Tom, in disbelief, slowly backed away, not a word coming from his mouth. As the door swung open and he left, the employees stood in stunned silence, still processing what had just occurred. Daniel knew this wasn't enough. It wasn't just about firing one man, it was about rebuilding the company from the ground up. "This garage will be closed immediately for renovations." Daniel announced, his voice carrying a sense of urgency and resolve. "I'm putting a stop to this right now. No one will work in these conditions any longer." He turned to face the employees, his expression softening slightly. "I'm offering full paid leave to all of you while the renovations are taking place. I want you to rest. I want you to recover. And most importantly, I want you to know that your well-being matters." The employees, many of whom had been working long hours in dangerous conditions, exchanged glances, some with disbelief, others with cautious hope. They had heard promises before, but this felt different. This felt real. Daniel wasn't just talking about new equipment or a fresh coat of paint. He was talking about changing the culture of the company. He was talking about making Roberts Auto Enterprises a place where employees could work safely, where their voices would be heard, and where they would no longer be treated as expendable. "We're going to bring in the right tools." Daniel continued, his voice growing more resolute. "We'll implement new safety protocols, and we'll make sure this never happens again. No more shortcuts, no more cutting corners. From now on, we'll do things right." The employees nodded their faces, reflecting a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism. They had been let down so many times before, but there was something in Daniel's tone that made them believe this time might be different. Lisa, who had been standing at the back of the room, watching this transformation unfold, felt a wave of emotions wash over her. For years she had been told her requests for better tools and safer conditions were unnecessary, even overblown. She had fought for her rights only to be met with resistance and dismissal. But now, in this moment, everything was changing. Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with respect. "Lisa," he said, "I want you to take charge of the renovations here. You know this garage better than anyone, and I trust you to lead the changes. You'll have full authority to implement new safety standards, and every request you make will be approved without hesitation." At first, Lisa was taken aback. She had always done her work quietly without seeking recognition, and she had never expected to be in a position of authority. But as she looked around at the faces of her colleagues, many of whom had seen her fight for change for years, she realized this was her moment. This was her chance to make the difference she had been hoping for. "Thank you," Lisa said quietly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. She could feel the weight of the responsibility, but she also felt something else, a sense of hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As the employees filtered out, each person seemingly lost in their own thoughts, Daniel remained standing in the middle of the garage, taking in the reality of what had just occurred. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The board of directors would undoubtedly resist the changes he was making. There would be financial challenges, logistical hurdles, and the pushback from those who had grown comfortable with the status quo. But Daniel was no longer the detached CEO who viewed the company through the lens of profit alone. He was a man who had seen the impact of his decisions on real people, and he was determined to fix it. With Lisa leading the charge and the support of the employees behind him, Daniel felt confident that they could turn Roberts Auto Enterprises into a company that not only thrived, but did so with integrity and respect for everyone who worked there. The transformation had begun, and this time it would be lasting. 3 months had passed since the momentous day when Daniel Roberts had fired Tom and vowed to turn Roberts Auto Enterprises into a company that valued its employees above profits. The garage, once a place of neglect and exploitation, had undergone a complete transformation. New equipment had been installed, from high-quality tools to state-of-the-art safety systems, ensuring that the employees would no longer have to work in dangerous conditions. The renovation was not just about physical upgrades. It was about revitalizing the company's culture, restoring a sense of pride and dignity to the workers. The garage was now a place where safety came first, where every employee's voice mattered, and where respect for one another was the core principle. In the middle of it all stood Lisa, who had been promoted to the newly created role of Executive Director of Safety and Compliance. Her years of hard work, her dedication, and her ability to overcome adversity had earned her this position, and she took to it with a fierce determination to ensure that the changes Daniel had promised would not be temporary but permanent. Lisa now had the authority to enforce safety protocols, train new hires, and ensure that every mechanic and worker would have the tools and environment they needed to succeed. The transformation of Roberts Auto Enterprises wasn't just visible in the physical improvements, it was also reflected in the company's culture. The employees who had once felt overlooked and undervalued now walked through the doors with pride. There was a renewed sense of camaraderie, a shared belief that the company's success would be built on respect, fairness, and integrity. For Daniel, seeing the workers so invested in the company's new direction was a testament to the power of change. It wasn't easy to shift the culture, but the results spoke for themselves. Employees felt empowered, and for the first time in years, Daniel was seeing genuine loyalty and dedication from his team. The environment had shifted from one of fear and resignation to one of opportunity and mutual respect. But the work wasn't over. Daniel knew that to ensure these changes were sustainable, he would have to defend his decisions and leadership in front of the board of directors. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but Daniel was ready to face them head-on. The board meeting was set to be one of the most important moments in Daniel's career. As he stood before the directors, he could feel the weight of their scrutiny. They had seen the financial reports and were aware of the impact the renovations had on the company's short-term profits. Some of them were skeptical about the long-term viability of the changes Daniel had made. They questioned whether the investment in safety upgrades and employee welfare would pay off in the long run. But Daniel had done his homework. He had the data, the testimonials from employees, and a clear vision for the company's future. He began by addressing the board's concerns directly. "I understand that these changes have come at a cost." He said, his voice calm but firm, "but I believe this company's future lies in creating a culture of integrity and respect. We've seen significant improvements in employee morale and productivity. Our workers are more engaged, more focused, and more loyal than ever before. And while our profits may have dipped in the short term, I believe these investments will pay off in ways that go beyond dollars and cents. We're building a stronger, more sustainable company that will continue to thrive for years to come." Daniel then presented his next bold move, the implementation of a scholarship program aimed at supporting young mechanics from marginalized communities. The program would provide financial assistance, mentorship, and hands-on training, ensuring that the next generation of skilled workers could break into the industry and thrive. "We need to invest in the future." Daniel told the board, "We've seen the impact of a lack of opportunity for talented individuals like Lisa. This scholarship program will create pathways for young people from all backgrounds to join the trades and build successful careers. It's an investment in our community and the future of the automotive industry and in our company's legacy." The board listened carefully, and while some members remained cautious, others were moved by Daniel's commitment to social responsibility and the long-term vision he was laying out. The program was approved, and with it, Daniel had taken another step in ensuring that the company would not only be profitable, but also a positive force in the community. The results of Daniel's leadership were evident in the company's financials. Despite the initial costs of the renovations and the investment in employee welfare, Roberts Auto Enterprises began to see a rise in profits. The improvements in the work environment led to fewer accidents, higher efficiency, and greater customer satisfaction. Employees who felt respected and valued worked harder and took greater pride in their work, which translated into better service and higher quality products. The positive changes were also reflected in customer feedback, with many customers expressing a renewed sense of trust in the company. Roberts Auto Enterprises was no longer just another business focused on profits. It had become a symbol of what could be achieved when integrity and respect were placed at the forefront of corporate values. As the company's profits rose, Daniel knew that these were not just financial gains. They were a reflection of the company's commitment to doing things the right way. For Daniel, the success of Roberts Auto Enterprises wasn't just about the numbers on a balance sheet. It was about building a legacy that would be defined not by how much money the company made, but by how it treated its employees, how it contributed to the community, and how it stayed true to its values. Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had inherited a company from his father, a company that had once been built on integrity but had become lost in the pursuit of profit at all costs. Now Daniel had restored those values, and in doing so, he had created a business that would continue to thrive for generations to come. As he looked around at the changes he had made at the renovated garage, the newly empowered employees, and the scholarship program that would change lives, Daniel felt a deep sense of pride. This was a company built on dignity, not just profit, and that was the legacy he hoped to leave behind, with the company now on a sustainable path. Daniel turned his focus to the future. The scholarship program had already begun to change lives, and he was determined to expand the initiative to include more communities. The company's success was no longer just measured by its financial growth, but by the positive impact it had on the lives of its employees and the next generation of skilled workers. As the company continued to grow, Daniel knew that the foundation of integrity and respect would be what set Roberts Auto Enterprises apart from its competitors. It wasn't just about the tools or the equipment, it was about the people who made the company what it was. And as long as he was at the helm, Daniel was committed to ensuring that every decision made would reflect those values: integrity, respect, and a commitment to doing what was right. These would always be the pillars of Roberts Auto Enterprises' future. If this story has inspired you and shown you the power of transformation, integrity, and leadership, be sure to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ. Join us as we explore more real stories of business evolution, uncover hidden truths, and dive deep into the journeys of leaders who choose to do things the right way. Don't miss out. Hit the bell icon and stay tuned for more incredible stories that prove integrity is the best path to success. Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation.